I have one speaker who is coming from NALSAR. Sorry? Back to NALSAR. So I think the conference, he'll round it off in a good way because it is about technology, it is about transport sector, it is what he's going to talk, but from a legal standpoint. And then we have another gentleman sitting here very quietly listening to all this, because this is, what he's going to talk, I'm already going to state it before Kushank. He's going to talk about careers in aviation. We haven't spoken about, or in the last 2 days we have only been talking about law, policy, technology and all. But Kishore is going to very quickly go through what are the opportunities and especially the initiative he has taken over last 5 years. And he's going to tell you more, but I think it's important because you have spent some money, invested your time, you need to get that money back as well. So it's important, and he's going to tell you how to get that money back and what are the opportunities and how do you enhance your skills. But first, Kushank, yourself, and make NALSAR proud, okay? You have a lot of responsibility here. Good luck.
Thank you, sir. There are two thoughts which come to my mind. The first thing is that I know I'm guilty of addressing in a graveyard session after lunch is over and everyone is sleepy and tired, and at the end of 2 days of very intense and mind-boggling conversations. The other thing is that having been Professor Balakista Reddy's student, I still feel I'm doing my project presentation for Professor Reddy, and I'm actually slightly nervous that things should go as ideally. So basically I graduated from NALSAR in 2014, and I've worked with Luthra and Luthra also at Delhi, which is a tier 1 law firm in India, and now I have my own firm at Delhi. So this presentation, abstract and the consequent research paper has been co-authored by my colleague Abhinav Goyal, who is not here today. Basically, when we read the words artificial intelligence, and my topic here deals with artificial intelligence in the aviation sector, and ma'am, this is actually going forward from what you had said, that we always talk about the growth, possibilities and all of that, but we need to still talk about where we are lacking and where we have to go. And it is slightly with a futuristic vision. And when we talk of artificial intelligence, invariably we think of flying cars and driverless cars and pilotless airplanes, etc. But and the moment we think of that, then you know that probably the speaker is going to talk about something which will happen in 2030 or 2050. But what I'm going to talk about is something that happened just last year, and which is this. And this was the accident which was caused primarily because the artificial intelligence which was there in the aircraft was able to overpower the human decision control which was being given by the pilots. So that way, the artificial intelligence to that extent probably has a mind of its own, again, which is debatable, which I will address through my presentation. The limited scope of my presentation is, and the thing is that every time we talk about artificial intelligence as such, and we talk about aviation liability as such, but the existing research, at least in India, does not connect both of them. That what if there is liability and what if there are accidents which are caused by failures of artificial intelligence? Who is responsible and what is the scope of liability? And it is that gap in research which I am trying to address through my presentation. So, through this presentation, I essentially want to examine the liability framework with respect to artificial intelligence in the aviation sector, and then examine problems and suggest solutions. Again, this I just want to hit on the core point of the paper instead of the whole thing. So, basically, if you look at the Carriage by Air Act of 1972, which is the principal Indian legislation which deals with aviation liability, adopting the international conventions, the relevant provision is the 3rd schedule, clause 1, which says that the carrier shall be liable for damages sustained in case of death, and there is only in case of death or bodily injury of a passenger upon condition only that the accident which caused the death or injury took place on board the aircraft or in the course of any of the operations of embarking or disembarking. For instance, take for example the Mangalore Air India, the runway overshoot which happened, and then there was an accident and 180 people died. Primarily this covers that kind of a situation. The only way that the carrier can exclude its liability is by relying on Rule 21 Clause 2, which says that the burden is essentially on the carrier to show that it did not, that the damage was not due to the negligence or wrongful act or omission of the carrier or its servants or agents, or the damage was due to the negligence or other wrongful act or omission of a third party. I would request you all to focus on 21(2)(a) and B. The point is that in a situation such as the B737 accident which had happened which by the way can also happen any day in India, any time, and probably it also keeps happening, because many a time now the accident reports say that they all attribute it to pilot error or pilot error in decision making. But not everything can be attributed to pilot error, and for that matter not everything can be attributed to the carrier. So what is it that in a case of artificial intelligence going wrong or overpowering the manual decision making, who is to blame? The burden is on the carrier. So you obviously, in such a simpliciter situation, you can safely put carrier or its servants or agents out of the scope of liability. There is a school of thought which attributes a third person independent existence to the artificial intelligence as such. Now this is something that needs to be addressed, and especially when contracts are being drafted, that you ensure that the liability shifts from the carrier in such cases of artificial intelligence going wrong. But the question is, if you shift it from the carrier, where does it go? Does it go to the manufacturer, or does it go to the artificial intelligence as a specific, as a separate unit? One way of doing it is that you have an indemnity clause in the agreement between the carrier and the manufacturer, where the carrier says if it is being sued for something which is caused due to the negligence of the manufacturer, then the manufacturer will indemnify it against all costs or whatever proceedings are going on. That is one way, I would say, of going around it, and which is usually done, because then the carrier is able to claim the whatever it has to pay, the compensation from the manufacturer. Now again, so how do we understand the negligence of carrier when the burden of proof is essentially on the carrier? The other way of looking at it is that as and when you have these accidents happening in the existing framework, it will obviously be in a court-monitored mechanism which deals with understanding whose negligence it was. And whether are we equipped to deal with these things in India at the present stage is something that we need to look into. The DGCA monitored inquiry is obviously set up, but whether or not it can take the place of a judicial inquiry by a court, that is something that needs to be answered. Whether or not it can conclusively, and what will be the consequent action of attributing negligence and accidents, all these things are gaps in the existing framework. Interestingly, I did a research from 1983 to 2019. How do the courts understand artificial intelligence? The Andhra High Court in this 1983 judgment, it was a slightly different context, but it was that you have OMR sheets which are given, and you have to shade the whatever hall ticket numbers, and then you also have to write the hall ticket numbers on top. So the system is that in India, you just encircle and darken the circles, and then the OMR sheet is read by a machine. Some candidate made a mistake in darkening the circles and he was disqualified. He went to the court. The court, instead of just limiting it to saying that the computer could not read it and therefore the system should not be held liable, the court said that it is a question of livelihood. So even if there is an interface of computer and there is artificial intelligence, and these are the words, because it is about livelihood, manual intervention is still possible, and therefore the employment should be restored. So this was the attitude of the court back in 83, where even where everything is automated, everything is computer oriented, you still expect that there has to be some human intervention. Incidentally, after 34 years in 2017, the same High Court gives a similar judgment. Now, if this is the judicial attitude which is continuing, then how can we just put all the liability on artificial intelligence, meaning thereby we are still at least legally not at a stage where we can have entire decision making being done by artificial intelligence, at least in the aviation sector. The other way of looking at it is how do we according legal personality to artificial intelligence. Probably this is one of the things on which we need to debate upon, because in the West there is growing jurisprudence which talks about giving a separate legal existence to artificial intelligence. The second thing is that, again, what I was saying in the context of manufacturer law, you can protect yourself by having that indemnity clause, but whether or not and to what extent the manufacturer should itself be liable should be debatable. You should not attribute liability on the manufacturer just because he had supplied the AI equipment. Again, that would depend on a fact-to-fact scenario. There have been cases where pilots have been victims of accidents, and to that extent you need to have the employer protection for liability. Also, there is a separate statute, there is the Consumer Protection Act. All these acts, for at least for compensation, especially in artificial intelligence kind of cases, the courts say that everything goes parallel. So you get your money right under this Carriage by Air Act. You also get it under the Consumer Protection Act. That has been decided by judgments. So this dual, triple liability, it's like double jeopardy, that has to be avoided. And yeah, so I would be very happy if we can have your thoughts on these on this paper, so I can incorporate them in the final research paper that we do. This is my email ID and phone number. We are based primarily at Delhi and Hyderabad. And thank you so much for patient audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Kushank. I think we kind of covered everything that is possible, at least that I could think of in the last 2 days, whether it's law, policy, business, operations, now also about opportunities. I'll open up the floor for questions if you still have energy. Any questions? Maybe one? Okay. Carry.
Sir, for the last 2 sessions, yesterday and today, the industry should grow that, but economical standard of the people also has to be grown in India. When the economical standard of the people will grow, all the certain airway or other sector will develop. Until that, we can't expect that 10% or 20% growth in the aviation or other part. It will be only the 5 to 10%. So that keeping in the economical growth of the people also, and industrial corridor also has to be invested. And moreover, the policies are coming, but implementing of the project, it takes from 5 to 10 years. It's very easy. But in India, one project, if we see one speed rail, we are taking about nearly, Lalu Prasad Yadav is there. From that time onwards, we are not seeing any speed rail also. Because the faster we develop and faster investments, then the faster the development countries. The faster bills pass down, but work is very, very slow. Dead slow. That's if it is also very faster, then the country growth also will grow very faster. That's mine.
You want to speak? Yeah, I'll take the liberty of answering this question, although I think that 3-4 things that you have covered in one question. What you say about economic prosperity and all of that, it is a chicken and egg concept. I agree. Because on the one hand, you wait for people to reach a certain level and then they access aviation space. But you also had Air Deccan, which when that had started, that was a low-cost carrier, and it revolutionized the way in which you looked at aviation sector in India. You talk about time taken in decision making. I agree, it takes time, but you also have proper land acquisition happening of airports, etc., which we had covered in the earlier conference. I don't know if you were there. And so these airports, all of these become ecosystems in their own. You go to Hyderabad airport now, you have thousands of cabs which are waiting over there. So these airports have brought economic prosperity also. So we have not really waited for people to be economically prosperous to avail of these facilities. But I agree that there are bottlenecks that we have. I agree there is policy paralysis, and I agree that we need to work on these issues before we can actually fully utilize these.
Just to add the point of high-speed railways, I still believe that India needs investment for laying down more tracks. High-speed railways, sorry, high-speed railways as such is not required. What we require is more tracks. And because we also work closely with the railway working group, which is also the same thing as AWG, we still feel that more than high-speed trains, India requires a train which can go till 140, 160, but we require much more tracks. Because that is the basic infrastructure. If you tomorrow bring a high-speed train, it might reach to Bangalore in 2 hours. But that 2 hours is being reached at the expense of some other train. Because they will make sure that some other train takes more time. So it's also important you bring high-speed trains, but before that, bring much more rail tracks. That's the basic point in railways at least.
Just to add to your point, there is a huge change which is happening in India right now. Okay, in the last 4 years, DGCA, or maybe in the last 2 years, DGCA has hired more than 400 officers. Okay, and it is the only department with more than 400 gazetted officers. Okay, and the rules are so simplified now. Previously, even if an engineer has to get a license, DGCA has to be there. Now they have adopted the European model, so where the responsibility and the onus lies on the airline, because the airline knows who is capable more. You got it, right? So this is something which is practically applied not only in India but also in the rest of the world, like developed countries, especially in Europe. Now, this is something which has increased the induction rate of the aircraft also, because the airlines know how many aircraft they are getting and how many engineers are required, how many cabin crew are required, or whatever it is. Then based on that particular thing, they are doing this trainings in advance and making sure that the staff is available on time. That is the reason, although Indigo has grown, it is not it is like an explosion, I would say. In 10 years, you have more than 250 aircrafts. Okay, but still maintaining very high standards, and without any major aircraft incidents, they were able to achieve it. Just not because of their thing only, but the government also is helping them at this point of time. There are a lot of changes which are happening and may not be visible to us, because they are something which are happening at the organization level and at DGCA level. Okay, any queries? And coming back to this particular thing, 5 years back, India had less than 82 airports which were functional, but now we have more than 105 airports which are functional. Okay, and the more airports you have, the better it will add to the GDP of the country. For few countries, especially for USA and some other countries, it has a huge impact on the GDP. It has more than 1 or 2% of the contribution when it comes to the GDP. Okay. Any queries? Have we addressed your?
I think we will take.
In India, there are number of airports as per the requirement. And the permission for the new airports is taking about nearly 10 to 15 years for the construction of the airports. That is also one of the lowest standards to government of the airways.
Correct.
I think we will take the discussion outside, because I think people are, almost there now. I will close off the 2-day conference. I thank each and everyone for your participation. Please give a big round of applause to everyone.